Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this boho moon painting we're going to be covering in this video today. It's a real fun one and it's been around for a while, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And yeah. All right. So I'm going to start here with nice blank canvas. You can paint on other surfaces as well. As far as paints go, I'm going to be using our basics. So we're going to use some white, yellow, red, a cobalt blue, a ultramarine blue, and a burnt umber brown. As far as other things that you may need, you're also going to need 2 round objects. I have some stencils I made, but dinner plates, pot lids, anything works. But you'll need 2 different sizes. And then for your brushes today, we are going to be using nice large flat, a medium bright or filbert, and a nice little round. And these are going to be our best friends during this painting, so make sure you take care of them. Also, you want to make sure you have a pencil or a piece of chalk, because we are going to do a little bit of sketching. And finally, you're going to need a little alcohol, and not the drinking kind. This is rubbing alcohol. Don't drink it. So make sure you have a little bit of that too for a technique. All right, let's go ahead and get this started. So I'm going to be using my nice large flat brush. I'm going to give it a nice dip in my water cup, and I'm just going to go ahead and wet my canvas. And it doesn't really matter how you stroke it, you're just making that canvas nice and moist. So just brush that water everywhere. Like it's a hot summer day and your canvas is very thirsty. So give that canvas some water. And you might notice that I just sped really fast through this wetting process, and that will happen a little bit throughout the painting. So if I start moving a little too quick for you guys, it's all right. Pause and fast forward, rewind as you please, and work at your own pace. So no worries. All right, so once you have your canvas wetted, I'm going to mix my color for my background. So I'm going to take a nice good chunk of my cobalt blue, and I'm going to take a touch of yellow with it afterwards. But I'm just making sure I have enough blue, because sometimes if you use a little bit too much yellow, it turns very green. And we want more of a turquoise, so we want it on that blue side. So cobalt blue with our yellow. Now I'm just mixing it together, getting a color that I'm satisfied with. Once I get there, I'm going to add just a touch of white to it, because I'm going for more of a teal color. Once I have enough, I'm going to take my brush and wet it into my water, and I'm going to go ahead and start brushing it onto that canvas. And as you can see, it's going to start diffusing and giving this kind of like watered down texture. And that's what we want. So I'm just going to continue to fill this in. And I'm constantly going back and forth, grabbing a little bit more paint, a little bit more water. If you feel like you need to adjust your color or add any touches of different colors, you can. You can even do this background with a different color as well. So don't be afraid to get a little bit creative. But I'm just going back and forth from my paint to my water, and I'm just constantly wetting down. And as you do this background technique, you want to make sure you do move a little quickly with it, because if it dries, our next step is not going to work. So it's very important that it stays very wet. All right, so I have my color in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my rubbing alcohol. I'm just going to go ahead and dip my fingers right in there, and I'm going to drip it and flick it onto my canvas, and it's just like magic. And you'll start noticing it's going to kind of push that color away from it, and it kind of gives you these fun little kind of bubble feels. And you can have as much or as little of these as you want. But as long as that background is still wet, it will do this. If it's not doing this, it means that your background's probably dried or you have too much paint. So, use a little extra water, wet it down a little bit more, and you'll be good to go. All right, so once you have those in there, then we're just going to let this dry, and we're going to zoom right through our drying process here. Now, if you are waiting for this to dry, remember, you can pause at any time, and there's no worries. This is also a very good time to grab your big circle objects, like dinner plates, pot lids, if you didn't do so already at the beginning. And also make sure you have a pencil or chalk. Either works. All right, so I'm going to start with my largest circle, and as you can see, it wants to take up most of the canvas, and I'm just going to go ahead and trace around that. And I'm using a pencil, but as you can see, it's kind of hard for you guys to see, so I'm just going to go back over in chalk so it pops off a little bit more. But if you are using pencil, just make sure you draw on there very softly so it's nice and light, just enough for you to see. Because if it's too dark, it's going to be kind of hard to cover up. And if it's drawn on lightly, you can still have a chance at erasing it. Now I'm taking my smaller circle and I'm lining it up on that right side with the larger circle. And this is going to create our crescent. So once I have a crescent, I'm just going to go ahead and mark out where these flowers are. And I have 8 flowers in total. So I'm going to start with the 3 largest ones and then have 2 smaller ones towards the top. And then I'm going to do 3 more towards the bottom. So 1 more large one and then 2 smaller ones. And it's okay if these overlap. And then from those flowers, I'm just kind of making a center line towards the tip of the crescent. All right, so once we have this sketch out, and it doesn't have to be perfect, we're going to go ahead and start painting in our flowers. So I'm going to start first with the base for our roses. So we're going to take red, nice good chunk of red, and bring it close to my brown. And I'm going to mix a nice kind of burgundy wine color. And if it's too red and not dark enough, add a little bit more brown. If it's too brown, add a little bit more red. Or do an entirely different color, but start with a darker version of it first. But I'm going to take this color and I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the entire circle of my roses. And you can kind of place yours differently if you'd like. But I have 3. I have 2 large ones and 1 small one. And I just fill it in like so. And once I have that filled in, I'm just rinsing out my brush. And we're going to move on to our next flower. So the next flower that I want to do is one flower that's slightly being covered up by my second rose. So I'm going to be using my medium brush, so Filbert or your Bright. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here so you guys can see it a little bit better. All right, so with this, I'm going to mix a nice kind of warm yellow. And I kind of like to compare my colors to food for some reason. I don't know. But I always say that it's more of like a nice Velveeta mac and cheese yellow or French's mustard. So good chunky yellow, tiny amount of red. If it's too orange looking, go for more yellow. But you only need a nice touch of red, just a little bit. And once I have this color, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a nice chunk of it and I'm going to mix it with some white. So I'm moving it to a different spot, scooping a little bit of our mustard color, mixing it with some white, and we get a nice kind of buttery color. And I want to kind of make a little dot roughly in the center of that circle. And we're going to create a nice wedge shape. So kind of like two sides of a triangle, like so. And then I'm going to fill in this wedge just by pulling out from that point. And this is going to give us a petal. And I'm going to make the other petals just the same. And we got two more. So I create those little wedges and pull out. And this is just the first coat of this color, so don't worry if you see a little bit of your background popping through. You're just getting it laid down there. All right. So once you have that one in there, then we're going to do another one just up towards the top. So I'm going to mix a slightly different color. We're going to take some of our burgundy wine color. So red and brown, we're going to mix it together. And then I'm going to mix orange. So I'm going to take red and yellow and mix it together, get a nice warm orange. And I'm going to mix my orange and my burgundy together to get more of a burnt orange. So once you get a burnt orange color that you're happy with, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to zoom back in, and I'm going to swap to my smallest brush. So that nice little round brush. And I'm going to get them a little bit wet. We're going to take some of that burnt orange and we're going to do the same thing that we did with our large yellow flower, but we're going to do it with this little one. And everything's going to be just a little bit smaller. So I'm going to mark out the center with a nice little boop. And then from there, I'm going to make a little kind of fan of strokes. So it makes a little wedge. And then I'm going to do another one. And in total, I do 4. And sometimes I find that usually once we kind of get it filled in, it starts looking like a little plus sign, which means you're close. You're good. And you can kind of widen out those little petals a little bit, just so it looks more like a flower and less like a plus sign. All right. And then with this color, I'm going to go ahead and put in the start of some buds. And I try to do it very simply. One stroke is like a petal. And you can do groups of 1, you can do groups of 2s, and groups of 3s. And it just kind of makes it look like a bud is kind of opening up. So a single bud is more closed, and if you kind of group it up with a second or a third, it just shows it opening. And the trick is you just kind of press and pull towards your source of like where it's growing. So I'm just pressing and pulling. So once you have it done up top, you're going to go ahead and do it again at the bottom of your crescent. And I'm not filling in all the way towards the tip of my moon. I'm just kind of keeping it towards the base of the tips, because we're going to add some stuff for the tip later. All right, so I have my buds in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second layer to them. So I'm going to go in with burgundy this time, and we're going to make them a little bit more three-dimensional by adding some outer petals. And it's very much the same to how we do the inner buds. So let's zoom in here, and I'm just going to do the same technique, so that press and pull, and you're just slightly overlapping them, but you still want some of that orange to peek through. And there we go. 1, 2, 3. I usually recommend, if you have a single bud, do 2 of the darker ones on top. If you have a double, do 3. And if you have 3, you might want to do 2. But it just helps give like a 3D look. And if you need to, go ahead and like practice this technique, like on your plate or a spare piece of paper. Sometimes that helps. And I'm also going to do some like single bud strokes just to kind of fill in the area. And then I do the same thing on the other side. And it's not too hard. And I usually just try not to think about it too much. They're little blob flowers, as I like to call them. All right, so now that we have our little blob flowers filled in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap back to my medium brush. And I'm going to go ahead and remix some of my burgundy color. So I'm using red and brown. And we're going to kind of fill in our roses a bit more. So with our burgundy, I'm going to take a little bit of white and add it to it so we make a nice dusty rose color. And you want to start out with a little bit at first because we're going to do 2 coats to this. All right, so I have a nice little dusty rose, and we're going to zoom in on this one right here. And you want to just start with simple strokes, kind of going around circle. And I kind of start with a triangle, and then as I move to the second layer, I do slightly longer strokes that are kind of staggered as you place them. And you just keep working your way outwards until you reach the edge of your circle. And try not to think about it too much. And then I'm just going to take some of my dusty rose color and mix it with a little bit more white so it gets a little bit lighter. And I'm just going to go right over the tops of my strokes just to make them pop a little bit more, get a little bit more 3D, and you got a rose. All right, so now I'm going to do it to the other 2. Same steps. And that's the fun thing about this painting because you're learning different ways to make flowers, and then you get to just kind of repeat them throughout the bouquet. And I always find every time I've taught this painting, people just have so much fun doing the roses and they look so awesome. But don't be afraid to take your time, and you can always come back to them a little bit later to adjust. So once you got your roses in there, then what we're going to do is we're going to work on our yellow flower again. So I'm just going to go in with some more of my mac and cheese color here, and we're just going to give it a second coat before deepening up the center. And I try to get used to like pulling out from the center. You want to follow the length of your petals. So now that I have that mac and cheese color in there, I'm just going to go in with a little bit of orange and some of that burnt orange color. And I'm going to practice just kind of pulling out from the center. And if you need to, you can add a little bit of yellow to it to soften it. And if you go a little too crazy, you can go back in with a little bit more yellow to adjust. But that's all. All right, so we're going to come back to our little flower over here who needs some love. And I'm using my medium brush still, and we're just going to use a little bit of yellow. And you want to just be careful because it's very easy to overdo it like I did there. So I just kind of wipe off my brush and then use the remainder on my brush to kind of lightly highlight it. Just that little bit. It goes a long way. So once we have that one in there, then I'm going to go back in. We're going to use some of our mac and cheese with some white to get a nice kind of butter base. And we are going to work on these daisies. And the trick is you want to use that sharp edge of your brush and angle it inwards. So wherever your petal's going, you angle the sharp edge that way. And we're just going to kind of make our way around that center of the circle and pull in those petals. And you can have as many or as little as you want. If your yellow isn't kind of covering up the background enough, add just a little bit more white to it and it'll help it pop. And this is just a base coat, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just work on practicing on making your way around that circle and pulling in towards the center. And once you have the top one done, then you can do the bottom. And if you just kind of like move around it, kind of like a clock, it makes it 10 times easier. Same thing with our big guy over here. So I just kind of make a circle first for the center of the flower because this is bigger. And we do the same thing. So I'm just pulling in towards that center circle. And sometimes it helps if you mark out like the face of a clock. So mark out the 12, the 3, the 6, and the 9. And then just fill in the ones in between. But I always recommend start on the outer edge and pull in. It helps getting a nice kind of rounded edge for your petal. And I got a little bit of pink in there. That's no big deal. All right, so we have our base down. So we're going to come back to our little flower here, our little daisy flower. And I'm going to just make a little bit more of my mac and cheese color. So that yellow with a little bit of red. Lots of yellow, a little bit of red. All right. And you can either go in with this or you can add more white to it to help it pop. I do a little bit of both. So I'll do a little bit of the mac and cheese color and then I'll go back in with our mac and cheese plus white just to lighten it up a little bit more and do a second coat going around adding petals. And this is going to add in that kind of layered effect, a little depth to them. You can even add in an orange center here. So I'm just kind of patting around in the center with my yellow and red mixture. And I'm going to do the same steps with our other daisy. So what you do with one, you get to do with the other. And once you have your petals, just rinse out your brush, go in with a little orange, and pat, pat, pat that center. Now, for our big guy, it works very much the same way. You can use a little bit more of that nice mac and cheese color. So we got our mac and cheese, and I'm going to use a little bit more of my butter mixture here. And I'm just overlapping. And you don't have to like make your petals or your second coat directly on top of the previous ones. You can alternate them a little bit or offset them. So I got the butter ones in there. Now I'm going in with that mac and cheese one, darkening up some. And they're just quick one-stroke petals, as long as I'm pulling towards the center. Now I'm going to do a little bit more with some orange. And instead of doing like a really orange center, I'm going to add it to my petals. Just to warm this one up, because it's big and beautiful and very colorful. It's fun to have just fun with these. Don't be afraid to try new colors. So I'm going to make a kind of a deeper orange to put in the center here. But the different thing about this flower is there's going to be another ring around our center. So I'm going to go in with our burgundy color. So we're red and brown, if you happen to use all yours. And around our orange center, I'm just going to kind of make a ring. Just a nice kind of burgundy ring. And you might just have to lightly tap it on there. so your paint will sit. And that's our large daisy. All right, so now we have all the flowers done. So now what we're going to do is add our leaves. So I'm going to be using my smallest brush, the nice little round, and we're going to mix a nice green. So I'm going to take some of my mac and cheese color and bring it to my dark ultramarine blue. And we want to stick to the ultramarine blue side, so you want it kind of like a really dark turquoise. And I'm going to start at the tips of my crescent moon. And much like our blob flowers from earlier, it's very much the same technique. So I'm rolling to the point. We're going to make a little stem. So I'm going to press very, very lightly. I'm holding towards the ferrule of the brush so I get a little bit more control. And I'm going to press very softly just to create a stem. There we go. And it's falling towards the tip. And then from there, I'm going to start at the end and I'm pulling in to the stem, and that's a leaf. And then I'm going to start doing the same thing, but inwards, kind of towards like a V shape. There we go. And I'm just alternating them as I make my way back. And I always recommend start small first, because you can always go back in to adjust, but then they will get bigger. So if you don't want them to get really big, start small. You can always work on them. And once I have those main kind of branchy leaves in there, then I'm going to go ahead and start moving back into my buds. And you can start filling in some empty spaces with your leaves. And as you can see, I'm pulling back to where they grow from, so they have kind of like a rounded tip. But another technique that you can do for your leaves is you can pull outwards, and that will give it a more pointed tip. So it can give you a different style of leaf. You can even make leaves by doing like 2 parentheses, like I do right here, and then fill it in. So find a way that works with you and take your time. And like I said, if I'm moving a little too fast, don't be afraid to pause me. I'll still be here when you're ready. But once you have one side, then you go ahead and move to the other, do the same thing, and just continue filling those little gaps and spaces in around your crescent. And be careful about getting too big with your leaves, because you can very easily lose that crescent shape. I just like to use kind of my chalk or my pencil lines as kind of a guideline of where I need to put leaves to kind of hide the weird empty spaces. So it just kind of fills it in. But once you have those in there, you're just going to go ahead and give your brush a really good rinse off. And then we're going to come back in and we're going to use some bright yellow just to highlight the leaves. So I'm just getting a little bit. You don't need too much on your brush. And you're just going to go back through and you're just going to give them a little swipe. Just like that. And that's what you do. And you can have highlights on as many or as little leaves as you want. Just try not to think about it too much. If it's too yellow for you, you can always mix it with a little bit more of the dark blue to kind of green it up a little. But it's a good way to add a little bit more dimension to your leaves. All right, so we got our little highlights on our leaves here, and now we have to add our beads. So I'm going to use my chalk, but you can use a pencil, and we're going to draw some lines. So I'm going to draw one long line coming from the center, and I'm going to give them 2 friends that don't come down quite as far, just roughly shorter, and then they are going to get some shorter friends in between them. And you can do different kind of patterns or designs if you'd like. But I'm going to use the back end of my brush here and give it a nice little push into my dark blue paint. And I'm just going to press and just move my back end of my brush into a little circle to create a little dot. Just like so. And I do this on the end of all my little chalk strands here, just so they have a larger bead. And then I'm just going to go in and create some smaller ones. Now you can have them separated like this, or you can have your beads touch. So I decided halfway through that I wanted more beads, so I just went back in and filled in the spaces. And I did this with all my lines. And I always find this to be a really fun part because you don't really have to think too much about it. You're just kind of stamping the paint down. I'm also going to use the back end of my brush to create the centers of some of the flowers. So with my large daisy, I just kind of add those dark blue dots around the ring. I'm also going to add it to this really bright yellow flower here. We also don't want to forget the little red guy, as well as our other little daisies. There we go. And I'm just kind of patting. They're not perfect circles. And then I'm just going to kind of do like some dark baby's breath. I don't know if that's a thing, but it just kind of helps pull everything together just by adding some kind of like little taps with the back end of your brush just to fill in some additional spaces. Then I'm going to do it again with white. So I kind of wipe off the back end of my brush, grab a little white, and I just go to town. And this looks more like baby's breath. So just fill in any weird spots, anything that you feel like just needs a little more pop, or you can hide some spots with it. And you can have as much or as little as you want. But another thing I'm going to do is add a little highlight to the beads. So I'm just using the back end of my brush, that little bit of white, and I'm just dotting to the upper right side. You could do it to the other side, but it kind of changes how you're going to do your shadows. But just little dots. Once you have your little dots in there, then you got to start focusing on your shadows. So I'm going to go back in with the bristle part of my brush. And if you still have some of that turquoise color, I'm just going to take a little bit of water just to kind of thin it out. But it's not as thinned out as it was when we started this. If you're doing a different color background, you want to use that main color that you used. So since our highlight is on the right, our shadow is going to be on the left. And I just kind of pat to the left side of my beads. I don't really think about them being too round. There we go. And then I'm just going to kind of loosely follow that border of my flowers and everything. So it's not a perfect line or anything. It's just kind of closely following. And I do that to the bottom of my crescent. And then on the inside, top, I follow the bottom of that. And it just kind of helps it pop off the background a little bit. Makes it 3D. You have entered the third dimension, everybody. You should be excited. So once you have that in there, then you can kind of just add some finishing touches. So I'm going back in, adding a little bit more white to my dusty rose color, and just helping my roses pop a little bit. Yours might be already at a good point. You don't have to do this part. I just decided afterwards, I was like, these just need to pop a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I just made them pop a little bit. And then I realized we forgot one last thing. We have to add a little white to the center of our large daisy just to help it pop. And there we go. And that's the last thing, guys. And you've made it to the end of the boho Mooney painting. So make sure you give yourself a pat on the back, high five whoever you painted this with, show it off, share it with us, and hopefully we'll see you guys again. Thank you guys so much. and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.